Hello, welcome to Warrior Commission Now, where we talk about practical ways to live your Warrior Commission now in this moment, in this time as you grow in your relationship with God. I'm Christine Caston.
And I'm Sharon Rudolph.
And we're just here having fun, talking about these different things that God's put on our heart. And it's so great to see how God continues to move in this world and in this earth, and what He is doing in our lives in the midst of the crisis, in the circumstances, in the midst of our day to day, whatever it is that happens, whether it's a smooth day or a challenging day, there's always an opportunity, I think, to not be driven by the winds of the world. And so one of the things that we are looking at is that timing is everything. And in that we are discovering what it looks like to really step into God's timing and His pacing and the intentionality of that, and not to be driven by fear. Oh, I've got to pray for this because blah, 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 or, this is going to happen. I better hurry up. And if I don't do it, no one else will. And, and you kind of get into this place of running yourself ragged, as opposed to, hey, God, what's your timing for this? What would you have me pray? How would you have me go forward into this season? So Sharon, what do you feel like as your journey with God has continued forward? How do you feel like you've grown in the place of realizing that timing is everything?
Well, it is really cool that God created time. Time is not a problem for Him. Right. Though at times it's a problem for us.
Right.
It's not a problem for Him at all. He's got this time thing. And I love how in the Bible it talks, there's these guys called the sons of Issachar. And it talks about how they understood the times and the seasons. And people would come to them and ask them for their wisdom and their advice, things like that, because they understood the times and the seasons. And I think for us as believers in Jesus who walk with Him, we have the option to be aware of what God knows about time, what He knows about the times and the seasons and what's going on and what's best for us. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a huge blessing that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and when you think about, I think that different people are wired differently. Obviously, because we're all unique. But I do believe that as Jesus walked this earth and modeled over and over again, it's not time for that. Or in the fullness of time, this will happen. And so he spoke about time and timing, and he spoke about talking about they couldn't get me because it's not time for me to basically to die and to be resurrected. That has not happened because it had to happen on Passover. He had to align with God's timing of the feast.
Yes.
And what what His death and resurrection looked like, so it would match that. So God is very much about timing, and so a lot of our opportunity, I think, is to recognize that we have access to the timekeeper in our lives with God. Jesus said, "My sheep hear my voice." Jesus has a way of bringing us into those spaces and those places. But it's difficult for us to gain an understanding of it if we're revved up and we're working out of fear or out of urgency that's not God's urgency. We think we have to do this, striving, performance, that it all falls on our shoulders. And if God says, I need you to pray for this, then it falls on our shoulders, but we sometimes take false responsibility for things, which puts us out of alignment with God. Even though we may be praying what He would like to see happen, it puts us out of alignment because we're in a place of taking it on as our own instead of partnering with Him in it.
Right.
So anyway, but as we look at the tribes of Issachar, and as we look at Jesus and the fullness of time, it kind of leads us to God's intentionality, how intentional
Yes.
God is. And so, and Sharon, you're really someone who just I would say basks in, like you completely just immerse yourself in the intentionality of God. So often I hear you talking about that, and would love for you to share, what nuggets of wisdom you've come up with in the intentionality of God and what that looks like for you in your life, but also in other people that you work with.
Yeah, I think it's really key in our life in Christ
Mm-hmm.
that it is a partnership,
Mm-hmm.
and that why would we want to do anything without taking advantage of that partnership?
Right.
And
In the best possible way.
in the best possible way.
Not
Yes.
using it, but taking advantage of what's available and on hand.
Right. Right. Well, if my husband does construction, and he remodels houses, and he has friends who will call him up and say, "Hey, I'm working on this project. What do you think?" Because my husband is their friend, they're going to take advantage of his expertise,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're not taking advantage of him.
Mm-hmm.
He makes it readily available. Please call me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, I'll hear him talk to somebody. Well, if you'd called me first.
I could have saved you a lot of grief.
Yes. That's so often he will say, well, if you'd called me first. And so for us to have that kind of relationship with Jesus, know he's that friend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that he does want us to talk to him first, before we step in to the next thing,
mm-hmm.
before we make a decision, big or little. Mm-hmm. And that he loves being in that relationship with him. I think you mentioned the whole that we are his sheep, mm-hmm. and what it talks about in John 10 about how we do hear his voice. Mm-hmm. And that gives us access to wisdom that we would not have otherwise. The wisdom of God is so much higher than the wisdom of the world. And then we get to go to the deep places in God's love. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we like to say in the Warrior Commission that God doesn't see anything wrong with us. He sees what's missing in our relationship with him. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes when we're reacting instead of responding, it's because we're missing something in those deep places with God, and he wants to give that to us. So if we will slow down and step back and ask a few questions. Mm-hmm. And actually, I'm learning to ask the question, okay, God, what question do you have for me? Sometimes he asks me questions, so I learn to think differently. Mm-hmm. And that he empowers us to start thinking mm-hmm. the way he thinks.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that's so good. And there's a difference between God's intentionality also comes with his nature, right? So his timing of things has gifts with it that provides the opportunity for us to step into peace, that gives us the wisdom, that gives us the access to love and heart, that gives us the access to the compassion that he has for whatever that thing is. And so when we step into the fullness of time, we'll just call it that, right. Fullness of time for whatever that thing is, and whatever that looks like, whether that's stepping into the prayer or that's stepping into a place of action where we're actually actively involved with seeing that thing come to pass. Our hands are put to the plow, so to speak. We are in a place of operating in the promises of God for that timing. And it's when we try to force things. The Proverbs 2:19 that says, "Desire without knowledge is not good. How much more will hasty feet miss the way?" And basically
Right.
what that's saying is when, like, it's kind of like we've all done it. We get a word that's like a prophetic word and we say, oh, this is going to happen. And we start going out and trying to make it happen. And then God's like, come on, pull back. That's kind of, that's
Yes.
kind of that carrot that's out there. So, kind of where you're going, that plumb line, so to speak. So you can kind of see what's coming down the road. But this is what we have to do to prepare. I mean, we could see that in David's life. He was anointed king way before he stepped into that role. He had a lot to go through to be ready to step into that role. So we have that as well. And so God has a timing and a plan. And so much of our partnership is really aligning with that. It's connecting with him.
Yes.
And when we talk about responding and reacting, those are words we use that are really kind of internal communication. We know what that means, but when we react to something, it's usually an emotional knee-jerk kind of reaction to something that's immediately happened. But when we respond out of God's heart, then it's something different, because we're not just operating out of usually fear or self-protection, which is what a knee-jerk reaction often is, but we're operating out of God's love and compassion and his timing and his purposes. So there have been so many times in my life where I've been in prayer asking God for timing, understanding, and he has given me that timing, understanding, and then my job in that place was to wait and pray. And it wasn't always about taking action. It was about to pray into, to sow into, so to speak, the bowls of incense in heaven. They talk about the altar with the bowls of incense, that your prayer pour into those bowls. And at the timing when God says yes, those bowls are poured out. Those blessings are poured out on us. And so a lot of times, some of our preparation is really praying into it, because there's an alignment that happens in that place where our hearts are being attuned into God's heart for what that thing is. And we will approach it completely differently than we would have if we'd been hasty.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yes. And I love what you were saying about praying into it. And I think sometimes when we pray, we think it's like a vending machine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna spend my prayer quarter so that I can get back the candy bar.
Here we go.
Right. And that it's a totally different paradigm, that we are pouring into something, and that in that pouring in, there's a learning how to partner. There's a receiving that happens. We can never outgive God.
Right.
And that when we do pour in, he pours into us. So if we're doing something reactionary, then we may not have received what we need.
Right.
For it to really be what's best.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole story of Esther and how she was chosen to be queen, but she spent a year at the beauty parlor,
right,
getting ready. It's like God knew when the king needed to see her the first time. God had this timing in place that she didn't get.
Right. Without the favor of the master eunuch,
right,
who oversaw all of those preparations,
right,
he knew her, that there was timing of that relationship to be built so that he could help her in that process.
Yes. And so how when we position ourselves to pour out, and how God is pouring into us in this interaction, there's all these things going on that we may not be consciously aware of.
Right. Absolutely.
But there's kingdom stuff going on, and we get to be a part of that. I am just in awe of this God who lets us be his kids and includes us in his grand design. We're just the most blessed people ever.
Yeah.
And that we don't have to be afraid of the timing.
Right. Exactly.
We don't have to be afraid.
Right.
But in the intent, if we will be like Jesus and be intentional in the alignment and the partnering with the time, anything's possible.
And there's a lot of freedom in it. There's freedom in it as well. And there are things that happen in that place that take us into joy and recognition of how God's moving, like the details of how God's moving when they come together in that fullness of time, and you hindsight look back and you see how he's done all the things he's done, that kingdom stuff. Happened, for that one person to be in that place at that moment in time, that you happen to be there at that moment in time when you weren't even planning on being there,
Right.
And so to me, I've seen that happen so many times, that the goodness of God, the detailed nature of God, I call him the great multitasker, because that's who he is. He's always multitasking to bring those things into connection and alignment. So it is an amazing place to get to sit in the heart of God and to get to know him better. And he doesn't withhold from his children. He's a good God. So even if he doesn't tell what the timing is at that moment in time, it's probably because he knows we're going to be hasty and run out and try to make it happen. So it's not about him keeping it from us. It's about him, like knowing how we are and knowing we need a little more seasoning before we step into that place again. But anyway, guys, it has been great to talk with y'all today. We hope that you have been encouraged. Obviously, these conversations are ongoing. We're having a lot of fun with them. Just hope that you're having an enjoyable time too, but also being encouraged and blessed, and hopefully you're receiving something to apply to your daily practical life. And we just would love for you guys to check out the Warrior Commission. If you have a chance, pray about it, ask for God's timing, and at his timing, go to thewarriorcommission.com and find out more. So we will talk to you guys later. Y'all have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.